You know the feeling. You're home, doors locked, the world outside doing its thing. You feel safe. That's how it was in Springfield, Virginia, back in 1994. It was paradise, right up until November 20th. That's when it all shattered for Robin Lawrence. She was a young mother, just 37, and someone found her butchered inside her own house. Worse, her 2-year-old daughter was right there, in another room. She was the only witness. Think about that for a second. For nearly 3 decades, this case was ice cold. Cops retired, file boxes piled up, and Robin's family lost all hope. But guess what? They saved one tiny silent clue, a DNA sample. It just needed new eyes and a new trick, something called genealogy. And when that trick worked, it blew the whole thing open, proving the killer had been a clean-cut, active-duty soldier hiding in plain sight all along. That's the shocking truth we're chasing. I want you to feel the loss here. I want you to know Robin Lawrence, because without that, this whole story is just a file number. We're talking about a human life, cut short for no reason. Before she was a case file, before she was a headline that horrified a town, Robin Lawrence was just Robin. She was 37 years old. You know that age, right? It's where you feel like you finally got your feet under you. She had a home in West Springfield, Virginia. She had a husband, Ollie, and a little girl, Nicole, who was just 2 years old. Nicole was everything to her. Robin was doing the hard, beautiful work of building a life. She was cementing her family, her future. She was that person who always had a plan, always looked ahead. My take is that that's what makes this whole thing so crushing, the sheer amount of future that got stolen. Her siblings, Mary Cowens and Robert Warr, they tell you exactly how the loss felt. It wasn't just sadness, it was an explosion. Mary said the murder shattered their world. Can you picture that? Not broken, but completely shattered like glass hit with a hammer. That kind of damage doesn't heal. You just learn to walk around the pieces. She put it so simply and so heartbreakingly in court, "I hoped to grow old with her, but that was taken from us." That's the real crime, isn't it? Not just the moment of death, but the decades of birthdays, holidays, and milestones that Robin would never see. She'd never see Nicole grow up, graduate, or get married. Those future moments, those simple, beautiful things, all stolen.
Mary said for years she struggled. She went through the motions of a normal life, but it wasn't normal. It couldn't be. How do you go back to normal when there's a massive hole where your sister used to be and a killer is walking free? She didn't think she was truly okay any day after Robin died. That raw, honest pain. That's what we need to hold on to as we look at this case. The knowledge that the killer was out there, living his life, raising his own family, while hers was stuck in that unending grief. Robin's brother, Robert Warr, used words that are almost too heavy to carry. He described the impact as devastating beyond measure. They were devastated, shattered, the worst news possible. You hear those words and you realize this isn't a TV drama. This is real people, real family. They didn't just lose a sister. They lost the glue that held pieces of their world together. And that funeral, think about this. Mary Cowens talked about how the funeral had to be a closed casket. Just imagine, that's the last chance you have to see someone you love, to say goodbye properly, and it was taken from her. The brutality of the crime meant the family couldn't even have that final human ritual. That lack of closure, that final image being a crime scene instead of a peaceful goodbye, that's a kind of cruel punishment no family should ever have to bear. Robin was the heart of her home, that beautiful, comfortable house on Reseca Lane. Her husband Ollie was away on a work trip when it happened. You know the guilt that must come with that? Being gone when the worst thing imaginable happens? He was the one who got worried after not being able to reach her for days. He was the one who had to call a friend and ask them to check on his wife and his 2-year-old daughter. That call, that moment where his worry turned to terror, that's where the innocence of 1994 died for the Lawrence family.
When the neighbor finally went in, she found little Nicole, dehydrated but physically unharmed, alone in a room. Can you imagine the trauma for that little girl? Alone for what police estimate was at least 2 days while her mother lay dead just rooms away. The police chief, Kevin Davis, he talked about the crime scene later. He said he'd seen a lot of gruesome things, but this one was particularly gruesome. 49 stab wounds. This wasn't a crime of passion or a quick fight gone wrong. This was an absolute, shocking, savage act of violence. It was personal, even though the victim and the killer were complete strangers. The crime scene itself told the story of an unbelievable rage directed at Robin. A rage that made the police realize they were dealing with something profoundly broken. This murder wasn't just a loss for the family, it was a scar on Fairfax County. It changed how people slept at night. It introduced a kind of random, pure evil that they hadn't dealt with before. When the person who did this is a stranger, chosen at random, it makes the whole world feel unsafe. It tells you there's no place you can truly hide. Robin's life was taken in November 1994, but her family's life was shattered in slow motion over the next 3 decades. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, there was the empty chair. There was the constant nagging question, who did this and why? That question is a cancer that spreads, poisoning every happy memory with doubt and anger. Mary Cowens put that anger into words, saying, "Some of my grief has been replaced with anger. Anger that she had been taken from us for no reason, that this man lived his life, raised a family, knowing what he did to my sister. That's the ultimate injustice, isn't it? The killer gets to live out his years, get married, have kids, and pursue a comfortable career as a software engineer, while Robin's memory is forever tied to a crime scene." When the judge, David Oblon, finally looked at the killer years later, he said the murderer's cruel impact on the family he decimated was incalculable. He called it one of the worst crimes in the county's history. He wasn't just judging the crime, he was judging the 30 years of stolen life and broken hearts. We're going to get to the man who did this, Stephen Smirk. But you have to understand the depth of the void he created first. He didn't just kill Robin Lawrence, he stole her entire future. And he made sure her family would spend their lives haunted by the dark knowledge of his freedom. That's what we're fighting for here, correcting 30 years of that staggering injustice.
You know that feeling when you call someone and they don't answer? And after the second or third time, the worry just starts to settle like a stone. That's where Robin Lawrence's husband, Ollie, found himself in November 1994. He was away on a work trip, just a normal thing for a working couple. But the calls to his home in Springfield stopped connecting. No answer. After a couple of days of that silence, that worry turned to dread. It had to. This is the timeline of the fog. Robin's last normal day ended sometime around November 19th or 20th. She was in her own house on Reseca Lane. Think of your own home. It's your fortress, your safe spot. Robin felt that way too. She was with her little girl, Nicole, just 2 years old. The killer, Stefan Smirk, he told the cops later exactly how he did it. He was a soldier stationed at Fort Myer. He didn't know Robin. He didn't have a fight with her. He just drove out that night with one singular, terrifying goal. He had to kill someone. He said he drank a couple of beers, took a dose of a stimulant called ephedrine, and just drove until he got to West Springfield. Smirk parked his white Chevrolet pickup. He scouted the area. Then he found Robin's home. He confessed he broke in by taking a tree branch and using it to pry open a sliding glass door. It was crude. It was random. It was silent. He walked through the house, a stranger in the deepest, most private space of her life. And then he found her. Robin Lawrence sank to her knees. She pleaded for her life. Can you hear that? A mother begging for her life, knowing her baby is just in the next room? Smirk didn't care. He was there for one reason, and he carried out his plan with a brutal, cold precision he claimed came from his combat training. He used a knife. He stabbed her 49 times.
I want you to sit with that number, 49. That's not a crime of passion. That's an execution fueled by a desire to annihilate. It was a vicious, sustained attack. Robin fought back, though. That's the one thing that gives me some small measure of peace for her. She clawed at her killer's face. Smirk later confessed to detectives he got a small scar on his face from her fighting. He was worried, he said, that she had gotten his DNA under her fingernail. You see his mind at work right there? A monster focused on getting away with it, even as he was committing this savage act. He even cut the phone cord as she tried to call for help.
When he was done, he just fled. He threw the knife into the Chesapeake Bay from a bridge. He went back to the barracks, showered, and tossed his blood-soaked clothes into a dumpster. Just like that, the monster went back to being a clean-cut soldier. He moved on. But at Robin's house, time had stopped. The discovery itself is almost as painful as the murder. Ollie Lawrence, unable to reach his wife, finally called a family friend or a neighbor and asked them, please go check on Robin and the baby. On November 20, 1994, around 12:30 p.m., that neighbor went to the house. They noticed the back door was open. They walked inside. First, they found Nicole, the little 2-year-old girl. She was dehydrated. She was alone. She had been with her dead mother for at least 2 days. Imagine the terror. Imagine the silence. Imagine that small child wandering a house that had suddenly gone cold and dark. She was physically unharmed, thank God, but the damage done to her soul that weekend? Incalculable. The neighbor then edged closer to the main bedroom. That's where the police report gets thick. The witness saw blood. It was smeared across the wall. They couldn't go further. They couldn't face entering that room. It was too much. When the Fairfax County Police finally secured the scene, what they found was horrific. Police Chief Kevin Davis, a man who has seen a lot of terrible things, said the scene was particularly gruesome. The sheer violence of those 49 wounds told the story of a cold, uncontrolled rage. They knew right away this was not a robbery gone wrong or a typical domestic case. This was something else. This was a monster hunting. Detectives got to work. They collected everything they could. Most importantly, they collected the small, vital traces of the killer, the DNA. It was the only thing Smirk hadn't managed to completely wash away. They had the evidence, the silent witness that would eventually speak.
But in 1994, having the killer's DNA was like having a key but no lock to put it in. They had the profile, but they had no name, no match in the system. The killer was gone. Robin Lawrence was gone, and all that remained was the evidence, a grieving family, and a house haunted by an evil that had arrived and vanished without a trace. The case immediately went cold. The fog set in, and it would last for the next 29 years. The first 48 hours after Robin Lawrence was found, they were utter chaos. The police had a scene that screamed pure evil, a little girl who'd been left alone with her dead mother, and absolutely no good leads. You gotta understand, a murder investigation is a race against the clock. The more time passes, the colder the trail gets. The public is terrified, the press is screaming, and the killer? He's already miles away, taking a shower. Detectives swarmed the house on Resaca Lane. They had to figure out who Robin knew, who she fought with. The first, easy checks were run. Was it the husband? No, Ollie was out of the country on a work trip. That checked out fast. So then who? An ex-boyfriend? A disgruntled co-worker? A neighbor? They chased every single tip that came in, and I mean every tip. You'd be shocked at how many people call the police in a high-profile case just because they have a bad feeling about their mailman or because their cousin once had a fight with the victim. The case file ballooned with dead ends, hundreds of tips, thousands of hours, all leading nowhere. That's the grind of a cold case. 99% frustration, 1% hope. They knew this wasn't a standard break-in. This wasn't a robbery. Nothing significant was missing. The brutality of the 49 stab wounds told them this was something personal, even if the killer didn't know the victim. That's what makes these random violence cases so chilling for the police. There's no connection to follow, no web to untangle. It's like trying to catch smoke. But the original team, they did one thing right, a thing that saved the case for 3 decades. They collected the DNA. That was the crucial piece. The killer, Stefan Smirk, was worried about a scar on his face, worried about the phone cord he cut. But he wasn't worried enough about the small biological trace he left behind at the scene. They found it, they preserved it, and they built a genetic profile of the attacker. Now, stop and think about forensic science in 1994. It wasn't what it is now. They had the profile, sure, but they had to run it through what was then the very early stages of the National DNA Database. This database, called CODIS, Combined DNA Index System, only had profiles from a small pool of known offenders, typically people already convicted of certain violent crimes. Smirk? He was a clean-cut, active-duty soldier. He had no prior arrest record. He wasn't in the system. The computer screen came back blank. No matches. Nothing. Imagine you're the detective in charge. You know you have the monster's identity locked in a file, written in the language of biochemistry, but you can't read his name. That's an agonizing kind of failure. They had the key, but the lock they needed, the fully built database, didn't exist yet. The case wasn't just cold, it was frozen, solid, held by the limits of the technology of the time. Weeks turned into months, months turned into years. The original detectives, they had to move on. They had new murders, new crises. But these cases, the ones you couldn't solve, they don't leave you. They stick to your soul. I bet if you talked to the original lead detective, he'd tell you this was the one that would always haunt him. That's the price of the job, carrying the weight of the unsolved. They couldn't give Robin justice, and that failure stays with them long after they hang up their badge and retire. As the years passed, the pain for the Lawrence family changed from raw grief into a dull, constant ache compounded by a terrible injustice. Robin's sister, Mary Cowlins, spoke about that feeling. It's not just the loss, it's the constant knowledge that the person who did this is out there, breathing the same air, going about a normal life.
Stefan Smirk was doing exactly that. He tossed the knife, dumped the clothes, and went back to his life. He got accolades for his military service. He got married, had 2 children, a son and a daughter. He went back to school. He switched careers and became a senior software engineer, earning a great living. Think about the audacity. This man, the one who left a 2-year-old alone with her dead, mutilated mother, was out there building a future, buying a home, planning family vacations. He lived for 30 years under the protection of a false identity. A father and a professional, but always underneath, he was a killer. That's the kind of cruel betrayal that makes your blood run cold. The community, too, suffered. When a random killer strikes, the bonds of trust break down. Suddenly, every stranger is a suspect. Every quiet neighbor is viewed sideways. The police couldn't tell them who to look for. They couldn't give them peace. The case files were eventually boxed up, tagged as cold, and pushed into storage, waiting for the one new thing, the one spark in the dark that might change everything. The killer was safe, wrapped in the blanket of time and the slow pace of science. And the family? They were trapped, forced to raise Robin's daughter, Nicole, with this gaping, terrifying mystery hanging over her head. They couldn't move on because the final, essential step of justice hadn't been taken. They could only wait, hoping that one day, the DNA that failed them in 1994 would finally find its voice. I want you to try and grasp the most upsetting part of this whole case. It's not the violence, horrible as it was. It's that the man who did it, the monster who left little Nicole alone with her dead mother, was right there. He was in the area, walking around, likely watching the panic he had caused. The community didn't just feel fear, they felt betrayal. How could someone commit such a savage, random act and just vanish? Well, Stefan Smirk didn't vanish. He just put his uniform back on.
At the time of the murder, Smirk wasn't a local weirdo or a career criminal. That's why the DNA search came up empty. He was an active-duty soldier stationed nearby at Fort Myer. Think about that. A man in uniform, sworn to protect, driving out from his barracks with one sickening goal. He told the police later exactly what that goal was. It's one of the most chilling things I've ever heard. He said, "Something came over me. I just had to kill somebody. I can't explain it to you." No motive, no connection to Robin Lawrence, just a sudden, burning need to take a life. He drove into West Springfield, found a house at Rando, and carried out his fantasy. He used his so-called combat training to stab an unarmed mother 49 times. And then he just shed the crime like a snake sheds skin. He cleaned up. He threw the murder weapon off a bridge into the Chesapeake Bay. He returned to his post and went back to being a soldier. Who's going to suspect the clean-cut army guy? Nobody. He was instantly hidden in plain sight, protected by his lack of a criminal record and his status in the service. While the Lawrence family struggled to get through holidays, while Robin's sister Mary carried the constant pain of knowing the killer was free, Smirk was thriving. I mean, the audacity of this guy is breathtaking. He left the army, but he didn't stop living a good life. He got married. He even later had 2 children of his own. He earned military accolades. He went back to school. He bought a home. He switched careers and became a senior software engineer, pulling in a high salary. He was the definition of a stable, successful, respected community member in Niskayuna, New York. He built a beautiful, picturesque life on top of a grave. Can you imagine the coldness? Knowing what he'd done, knowing that little girl was left alone with her dead mother, and still being able to tuck his own kids into bed at night, it's truly terrifying. He got away with it for nearly 30 years, and in a way, he knew what he was. When he finally confessed, he summed himself up with a phrase that'll stick with you. He called himself a serial killer who's only killed once.
That's what makes the story so deeply disturbing. The monster wasn't a shadowy figure who fled the state. He was a man you'd pass on the street, a professional, a neighbor, a father. He was just hidden by his own normalcy. He was a ticking time bomb who thankfully only detonated once before burying his secret in the quiet comfort of an American middle-class life. The police were looking for a known criminal, a pattern, a trail. But Smirk had created his own category, the one-off killer whose evil was random and whose disappearance was total. The only thing that could ever pull him out of that perfect disguise was something he couldn't control, the DNA he left behind. The silence of 3 decades was about to be broken by a single, powerful voice. The killer, Stefan Smirk, was winning. He'd gone 30 years without a single consequence. He was proof that if you committed a perfect, random crime and you weren't already in the system, you could just escape. His DNA, that silent witness we talked about, was just stuck in a file drawer. It was useless. For nearly 3 decades, Robin Lawrence's case file sat in a dusty box in the Fairfax County evidence room. It sat there next to thousands of other cold cases, each one a stack of failed leads and unanswered questions. It's a box full of heartbreak. The killer thought he was safe. Time was his shield. But time doesn't just age paper, it changes science. The turning point didn't come from a new witness or a sudden conscience. It came from a new perspective. In 2023, a cold case detective, one who wasn't haunted by the original failure, decided to pull that box out. Why? Because the tools had finally changed. The only real clue they had was the killer's DNA, the profile they couldn't name back in '94. The old team had run it against CODIS and got nothing. Now, this new team realized they didn't need CODIS. They needed genetic genealogy. Here's how this trick works. Instead of comparing the crime scene DNA to a database of criminals, you compare it to the DNA that millions of regular people have voluntarily uploaded to public genealogy websites like Ancestry or 23andMe. You and I, we do it to find out we're 10% Norwegian. Cops do it to catch killers. The detectives sent the precious DNA sample to a Virginia company called Parabon Nanolabs. Their job was to take that anonymous DNA and see if it shared any markers, any common ancestors, with the millions of profiles in the public database.
It's like dropping a single needle into the biggest haystack in the world and then hoping one of the straws is related to your needle. And for the first time in 29 years, a lifetime of silence, they got a hit. This wasn't a direct match to Smirk. Don't think of it that way. It was far more subtle. The match was to a distant biological relative, a third cousin, maybe a second cousin twice removed. Someone who took an online DNA test and had no idea they were about to tear down a killer's 30-year-old wall of secrecy. That's the spark in the dark. That's the here we go moment. The hopelessness, the utter coldness of the case just broke. Suddenly the DNA wasn't a dead-end profile anymore, it was a compass. It didn't give the killer's name, but it gave the detectives a family tree. And every single person on that tree was a step closer to Stefan Smirk, the quiet, successful software engineer who thought he'd gotten away clean. The hunt was officially back on. The target wasn't the distant cousin. The target was the man at the center of the tree, the man who was just about to lose his anonymity for good. That hit to the distant cousin was the starting gun. Now, the real painstaking work began. This isn't like you see on TV where the computer just yells out the killer's name. It takes old-fashioned police work, but guided by science. The DNA didn't say, Stefan Smirk lives at 123 Main Street. It just said, the killer shares great-grandparents with this person in Ohio. Think of it like a giant half-built jigsaw puzzle where they only gave the cops a few corner pieces. The detectives, working with the genealogists from Parabon Nanolabs, had to build the entire family tree out from that single connection. They started with the cousin. They traced back generation by generation until they found the common set of ancestors, the people who linked the crime scene DNA to the innocent person in the database. Then they worked forward, mapping every branch of that family line, every brother, every sister, every niece, every nephew. They used old records, obituaries, public directories. It's tedious work, but it pays off.
They weren't looking for a criminal now, they were looking for a ghost, a male in his early 50s who had lived in the Fairfax area back in 1994, whose name sat somewhere on this massive map. The map was huge, but it still narrowed down the search from 300 million people to maybe a few dozen suspects. Slowly, they whittled the list down. Names started to pop up that matched the right age and, crucially, the right location. And then they saw it, Stefan Smirk. He was a soldier stationed at Fort Myer in 1994. The location, the age, the gender, it all lined up perfectly with a spot on their genetic map. But a genetic map isn't enough to get a warrant. You need more. The police went back to the original evidence file.
Remember how Parabon created that digital composite, that sketch of what the killer might look like based on his DNA traits, hair color, eye color, things like that? They took that digital composite and they mashed it against the records of the man on their map. What they found was uncanny. They pulled Smirk's high school yearbook picture. They found an old DMV photo from the 1990s. You'd think the passage of 3 decades would change a person completely, but the basic structure, the bone shape, the look in the eyes, it was the same man in the DNA sketch. They now had a name, a location, a time frame, and a picture. Smirk was living a quiet, successful life as a software engineer in Niskayuna, New York, near Shikactini. He was 300 miles away, running out the clock on his perfect crime. But the clock had just stopped. Fairfax County detectives flew up to New York. They didn't storm the house. They didn't want to tip their hand or give him a chance to destroy evidence. They went for the quiet approach. They just waited. They watched Smirk at his house. The moment came when he was outside doing something mundane like putting out the trash. That's when the 2 detectives approached him. They were polite. They were non-confrontational. They introduced themselves, showed their badges, and said they were working on a very old cold case from Virginia.
This is where the story gets really bizarre. Smirk said yes. He just agreed. He gave the sample willingly. Police Chief Kevin Davis later said Smirk's willingness to cooperate was highly unusual. Most people, innocent or guilty, would ask for a lawyer. They'd hesitate. But Smirk just handed over the evidence that would seal his fate. Maybe he was cocky. Maybe he thought the cops were just fishing, that his DNA was clean after all these years. Maybe, deep down, he was finally ready for the secret to end. I think it was the final, fatal mistake of a man who'd been living alive for 30 years and couldn't bear the weight of it anymore. The detectives took the swab, left in their business card, and then they left. They got into their car and started the long drive back to Virginia, the critical sample sealed in an evidence bag. The DNA sample was rushed to the lab. But before the official results could even come back, Smirk made his next move. He called them. The detectives were on the road heading south when Smirk called the number on the business card. He didn't ask about the swab. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He called and told them, "I want to talk, and I want to talk right now." The guilt was a dam that had finally burst. For 30 years, he'd built a wall of silence, but the moment 2 strangers showed up and asked for a tiny sample of his truth, the wall crumbled. The detectives told him to call 911 and go straight to his local police station in Niskayuna. They turned their car around and headed right back to New York. The long, cold night was over. The procedural hunt was done. The confession was next. They left him on his front lawn in Niskayuna, thinking they had maybe a week before the DNA lab results came back. That's the normal timeline. But Stefan Smirk didn't wait a week. He couldn't. The detectives were driving south, heading back toward Virginia, when Smirk called the number on the business card. He didn't ask about the swab. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He called and told them, "I want to talk, and I want to talk right now." 30 years of secrecy, and it cracked wide open the moment 2 strangers showed up asking about his past. That's how heavy the guilt must have been. It had been festering for 3 decades, and that one question was the pin that pulled the whole thing apart. The detectives told him, "Call 911, go to your local station." Smirk did exactly that. He turned himself in. On September 7th, 2023, police cars descended on the local station in New York. The quiet, successful software engineer, the father of 2, walked in and gave a full confession. He talked about killing Robin. He talked about driving out that night because he just had to kill somebody. He even gave details the police never publicly released, details only the killer would know. He described the moment Robin sank to her knees, and he chillingly spoke about using his combat training to carry out the attack. It was definitive. It was overwhelming. Coupled with the genetic evidence, the case against him was unbreakable.
The community in Niskayuna was stunned. Their quiet neighbor, the man they thought they knew, was the monster who had terrorized a distant town decades earlier. Smirk was arrested and extradited back to Fairfax County. He ultimately took a plea deal, which is often how these things end. On the charge of first-degree murder, he pleaded guilty. The agreement meant he couldn't get a life sentence, but it opened the door for the maximum sentence possible under the deal: 70 years in prison. The sentencing day wasn't just about reading a verdict. It was about the family finally getting their say. Robin's sister, Mary Cowens, and her brother, Robert Warr, faced their sister's killer. They poured out the truth of their shattered world. They spoke about the years of agony, the lack of closure, and the sheer rage that he had lived free while their sister was gone. Judge David Oblon listened, and then he delivered a powerful statement. He called Smirk's impact on the family incalculable. He called the murder one of the worst crimes in Fairfax County history. He gave Smirk the maximum: 70 years. Smirk was 53. The prosecution pointed out that, given his age and health issues, whether he got 36 years or 70 years, he was going to die in prison. And I think that's the point, the finality. For Robin Lawrence's family, the courtroom wasn't a place for celebration. Mary Cowan said the court case brought all the terrible memories rushing back. The pain doesn't just vanish, but for the first time in nearly 3 decades, the agonizing fear, the burning anger, and the haunting uncertainty of the unknown killer was finally replaced with justice. Stephen Smirk, the self-proclaimed serial killer who's only killed once, will never see freedom again. The DNA, that silent witness that waited so patiently, finally spoke its truth. And that, my friend, is why we must never let those cold case boxes gather dust. Because somewhere out there, a family is always waiting for that single spark in the dark.